did I do that? Sort yourself out, girl. Hi, hello, welcome back. It's Bethany from Beth and Books, and welcome to this little book nook. Okay, is Superman always as tired? So I realise I am about like 2 weeks too late on this, but either way, I'm coming at you guys with 20 books that I think you might like during quarantine. I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed that as I've been reading during quarantine, I've been more and more like restless. I used to be able to sit down and read like 300 pages without a break, but now it's like 50 pages and I want to stop and move around. So that's why the first genre I'm going to recommend is reading some manga, all graphic novels, although personally I've only read manga that I've liked and I'm not about to recommend you something I've not read. But anyway, the first manga is Naruto. Naruto is about a boy and he is a ninja of the Leaf Village, and essentially you see him grow up. It is a very huge world, a huge story. If you want to let yourself be completely sucked into somebody's like story about how they came, someone who was ultimately the weakest in his class to the strongest, this is a really good read. If you're wondering how big, this is a 3-in-1 volume. So you know, like one volume of manga is only like yay big, so you could read one and then put it down. I've also got 3 other mangas that I've started to read / have finished. The first one is Death Note. Death Note follows a boy who discovers a journal which is called the Death Note, and he realises that when he writes somebody's name in it, that person will die. If he doesn't specify how that person will die, they die of a heart attack. And at first he thinks, yeah, I can use this for good, you know, kill the criminals. But essentially, you know, he gets a bit power hungry and things go downhill from there. It's a story all about morality and what you would do if you were given that power. The third one I want to recommend is Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer is one that I've only just started, but I'm really loving it so far. Our main character essentially comes home one day to discover his family has been slaughtered by demons, and that includes his sister. However, his sister has somehow survived, but she herself has become part demon, and the story follows him as he's trying to avenge his family whilst also find a cure for his sister. And the fourth manga that I'm going to recommend you is Tokyo Ghoul. This follows a boy, again another boy. I need to read some manga with the female central character. Anyway, this boy essentially is attacked by a ghoul. Ghouls look exactly like humans, however they feed, kind of like vampires essentially, and he becomes half human, half ghoul. It's kind of essentially a demon vampire kind of story, and he doesn't want to eat humans, so he's trying to figure out how he can survive with who he has become amongst all of that. And then carrying on with the theme of shorter books, I've got poetry that is trying to escape. The first poetry I want to recommend is Young Pueblo's Inward. This is a poetry collection that, I don't know if you can see, I have dog-eared so many pages. Don't worry, this is my copy. And I've got so many highlights throughout. It's one of these modern poetry books, in my opinion, that doesn't just follow format. It's got more to it than that. So yes, there's like pages with like lots of white space, but the content itself is so much more uplifting and bold and empowering. It's not like, I've got this issue with current modern poetry where a lot of the time it's drab and it's talking about some really dark stuff that, although should be out there, sometimes it can pull you down. And in a time like this where it's quarantine, I don't want to be reading really dark stuff. I want to be reading something more uplifting. So there's Inward, and then the other poet that I like is Atticus. I've got 2 of his books. He's got his 3rd one out. And the reason why I love Atticus's poetry, not simply just because of the messages in the like poem itself, is the photography that he has throughout his poetry books. Sometimes, yeah, okay, I can understand that the poems themselves might be a bit cliche, but there's just some way and something about how he words his sentences and the synonyms he uses that really gets me smiling and makes me feel warm inside. The next subgenre I have here are contemporaries, essentially just light, fluffy kind of books. I've ordered these from like least intense, most fluffy, to more intense. At the top of that goes any book by Rainbow Rowell. I particularly like her fangirl story, but the one I've got for you today is Simon Snow. Yes, this is book 2. I get library books, guys. I don't know, I always have the book I want to talk about, but this is book 2 in the Simon Snow series. Simon Snow is essentially Harry Potter, but gay and really mushy, and focuses on the romance of Simon the One, you know, the chosen one trope, and Baz, who is a vampire, and they essentially hate each other. So it's a bit of a enemies to lovers trope weaved throughout this. Carry On is the first book, and it just doesn't take itself too seriously. You see the boys learning to get along and recognise and honour the feelings that they have within themselves. The second book I have is The Bookish Life of Nina Hill. You would have seen this one recently in my March wrap-ups. This follows Nina, who is a 29-year-old introverted book-loving lady, and it follows her as she's dealing with some family stuff that happens, but also getting a crush on the guy in the enemy pub quiz team. It is so fun. It is such a chick flick kind of read. You just want to wrap yourself up in a blanket with some popcorn. The next book I have here is Crazy Rich Asians. This one you have probably heard of. It made quite a big hit, with it being one of the first Netflix shows, I think, to have a mostly Asian cast. I love this book for a number of reasons. Firstly, the drama, the scandals. It is just so... it's like watching a reality TV show, which, if that's what you're in the mood for, this does it so well. I also really enjoy this because it talks a lot about that feeling of your place in a country which isn't where your blood ethnicity originally comes from, because our main female character is half Chinese, half American. Sorry, it's been a while since I read it. What I do remember is that it was just an absolute blast to read, and it is a bit of a thicker book. I think it is like 500 pages, so it's one that you can really snuggle down during the time and just slowly pace your way through and get swept up in the drama. And so now we get into the bit more intense stuff. The fourth book I want to recommend is Grace Year. This was my favourite book of January. Really, our main character, she has to go and survive with herself and other 16-year-olds in their grace year. So when they turn 16, they've got to go to this abandoned hut and survive for a year with each other, because the idea is that they have magic and the men are scared of that. It is essentially The Hunger Games meets The Handmaid's Tale, and I can't describe it any more than that without spoiling it. And then book 5 I actually have here still is Radio Silence. This is my favourite book I've read for LGBTQ plus representation. Our female main character is a lesbian. Yeah, not bisexual, no, she's lesbian. And then our main male character is a little bit unsure where he lies. There is a male gay homosexual character in here. There is talk about, there's also heterosexual people in here, talk about asexuality and pansexuality. Aside from the sexuality, this book is similar to Eliza and Her Monsters in that you have somebody who publishes a podcast on YouTube and somebody who is a fan of it and is drawing art for it, and essentially they come together, become friends, and then they have to deal with the secret coming out around who is who in the whole podcast world. So it is a little bit more hard-hitting if you are sensitive to topics such as homophobia or just cyberbullying and that sort of thing. Be a bit careful, trigger warnings for those. However, I think it is a really good read if you want to sink your teeth into something but also have a few giggles along the way. Next up I have potentially, spoiler, but potentially my favourite genre, and that is fantasy. And the reason why I love fantasy during this time is because you can get really lost in the world. So for these 5 books, I've gone from most intricate escapism fantasy to more contemporary but magical within it. So, as you saw, Game of Thrones, these are chunky boys, but if you've seen the TV series and you are as disappointed with that season finale as I was, you need to read the books. Granted, I read the books before the TV series, and let me tell you, as great as the TV series begins, so many other character lines are dropped. I'm talking about this like you guys know. I'm just presuming everyone knows what Game of Thrones is about. If you don't, essentially it's a political fantasy where the stories are told from multiple characters' perspectives, following them and all the different houses throughout the series as they are at war with each other for who gets the crown and the throne, as well as fighting the White Walkers that are up north. It's just a really massive epic fantasy series, and the ending, Martin, you need to hurry up and get another book out. Like, when I tell you guys that there are so many character lines that were skipped in the TV series, I am not lying. So many. Oh, I just need to talk to someone about it. So many things are omitted from the TV series, understandably, but essentially what I'm trying to do is convince you guys to read this so that we can have a talk about all the things that were left out. Come on, Martin, I'm waiting. Book number 2 for the fantasy that I recommend. Admittedly, I am only partway through season book 1, and that is the Mistborn Saga by Brandon Sanderson. I'm actually buddy reading this with a friend, which is why I haven't quite finished it yet, but every night I go to sleep, and I'm not kidding you when I say I think about these guys being the characters. I'm talking like they're my friends in this book. It is a fantasy that has a trilogy, then a trilogy, and then another series which is linked into the world as well. It's very Cassandra Clare wrote Shadowhunters, right? It's very Cassandra Clare Shadowhuntery in that all of the series connect somehow. That's what these ones do, and this world just pulls me in. When I read it, I genuinely completely forget about everything else that's happening everywhere else. Like, people in my house can be talking to me and I'll be like, yeah mate, what? Like, I did not catch a word of that. I was just watching the Mistborn do their epic jumpy in this book. It is great, love it. And then the next fantasy I have is my favourite book, you won't be surprised, The Starless Sea. This is kind of more of a contemporary fantasy, and the reason why I've put this in the middle rather than more at the contemporary end, because in my opinion, this book is all about getting lost in the fantastical elements. You open doorways and you follow Ezra as he essentially is discovering this world beneath the world full of stories and loops and characters and magical things, and it's just beautiful. I recommend going into this without knowing much about it, simply because you then discover things as Ezra does, our main character. It's a book that you want to come up for air after every like 30 or 50 pages, so it's perfect for putting down and having a walk when you start getting really restless sitting in the same spot for ages. But it's a beautiful, beautiful book. The 4th fantasy series book I want to talk to you guys about is The Wolves of Mercy Falls. This is by Maggie Stay-Farder, and I feel like this series is commonly overshadowed by her more popular series, The Raven Cycle, so I want to shed some light on this one. This follows Grace and Sam. Now, Grace was dragged off by wolves when she was little and bitten by them. Sam is a werewolf, and the werewolves in this world turn into wolves during winter, so it's not a full moon kind of thing, it's when it's cold, and I think that's for itself a really interesting take on the whole werewolf thing. And so this series follows Grace and Sam as essentially they fall in love, but they've got to deal with that, and then along come some other people to kind of join that little what's the term called when you have a family that all comes together? Nuclear family, so like a nuclear wolf pack, and it's just really fun. There are 4 books in this series and I thoroughly enjoyed all of them. If you're in the mood for something twilighty but not quite, because it's werewolves, not vampires, pick it up. And then my 5th fantasy series. In all honesty, you've probably heard of this series by now if you're watching BookTube. You follow children who discover doorways, go through doorways, discover worlds, live in that world, end up coming back to Earth, hate it here, and want to go back to their other realm. And it's just a really nice little short series where you're swept away in the tale of the world. Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan not a huge fan, that's a bit harsh. The plot isn't my favourite, the reason I read these books is for the world and the creativity and the imagination. And so that's why I can get absorbed in them during quarantine time. And the last genre I'm going to quickly talk about is thrillers. Now, there are 4 books in this genre, and only 4 because I've only really read 4 thrillers that I think suit this sort of recommendation video. The first one being The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. This series, I still need to finish the very last book. It's a chonker, so I keep putting it off. But oh my gosh, the drama, the tension, it keeps you wanting to be, oh, it's a page turner. So you have Lisbeth Salander and you have Michael Blomkvist, and together they work to discover the answer to this mystery surrounding an old guy who I've forgotten his name, but his long thought dead daughter keeps sending him these dried flowers, and it used to be like their little in thing, and he's like, what the hell is this all about? And so Michael and Lisbeth essentially try to figure it out. Trigger warnings for things like rape though, and murder and abuse, both emotional and physical. It's a pretty intense thriller, so just be aware of that. However, if you are okay with it and want to get sucked in, if you haven't already, highly recommend. The second book, I actually own the series, and that is the Red Dragon Thomas Harris series. This is essentially the Hannibal Lecter story origin tale. Not this one particularly, but the series. Red Dragon itself follows the detective who puts Hannibal behind bars. It's quite interesting because Hannibal has already been deemed criminal, and his detective just has to go and ask him for some help sometimes because, you know, you can't always be the mind of a killer. So the actual plot in this one revolves around this killer called the Tooth Fairy, and he essentially bites his victims, and that's the biggest lead that they have to go off. And it's just a really interesting tale because at first you only see the detective side of things, but then you get to see the Tooth Fairy's side of things, and it just really sucks you in. And not that you feel like it's okay what the Tooth Fairy has done, you know, like murdering and biting people, but you see things from his perspective, which I don't think is something you often see. Book number 3 is My Lovely Wife, and this book I think came out last year, so it's a relatively new one, and it follows a man and his wife who essentially get turned on by murdering people. At first it started out as like a really cool, like hip spark in the relationship thing, but what happens is the husband develops a bit more of a moral compass because he realises what effect this murdering is having on his daughter, who doesn't know that they're the murderers, by the way, but she's scared that the murderer will get her. It just follows him, his perspective, as he's like, oh my god, I love my wife so much, but she's hiding something from me, and maybe we should stop doing this because our daughter is sleeping with a knife under her bed because she's so damn scared. So what do we do about it? And it follows him, and essentially the tension at the end gets so intense. The 4th story I have for you is actually an arc I received last year, and I haven't seen it talked about. It's called Tigers Not Daughters, and I really liked this book. It's more of a mellow thriller in that it's kind of supernatural as well. So there's 4 sisters, and the eldest sister died accidentally, like it was a tragedy, but her ghost has come back and is haunting her other 3 sisters, and so it's a tale of loss and mourning and grief, but also a tale of dealing with kind of like an abusive dad, a town where nothing much happens, the feeling of claustrophobia within your family, as well as trying to learn who you are. It's almost like a coming of age story for the youngest of the sisters as well. And I honestly really thoroughly enjoyed it. So those are my 20 books that I recommend for quarantine time reading. I understand that some of them are pretty intense and pretty hard hitting, but if you are okay with that, give them a go if you want to be completely absorbed in the story. Thank you guys for watching, and if you have the time and energy, please consider leaving a cheeky like and subscribe down below. So happy reading and enjoy all the places